Half Moon Bay has always been a mysterious place, isolated, cut off from the rest of the world by mountains, concealed under a blanket of fog. It's a place where events should have turned out differently than they did, where people who should have succeeded failed, and people who perhaps should have failed succeeded. That, more than anything else, is the mystery of Half Moon Bay. In Half Moon Bay, the Chamarita Festival is the main link with the past. For more than a century, this traditional Portuguese event has been celebrated the same way. And during those 100 years, this event has outlived almost every idea, every plan for development of the coast side, plans which for some reason all seemed doomed to failure. The history of the Chamarita goes all the way back to the 13th century, when natural disasters plagued the Portuguese colony of the Azores. Crops failed and the people were starving to death when, according to legend, they were miraculously saved by a mysterious ship that arrived with food. To show her thanks, Portugal's queen marched through the streets of Lisbon carrying her crown to the church. And today, this kind of thanksgiving has been perpetuated by descendants of the first Portuguese who left their homeland to settle in Half Moon Bay.
In our family, there's been 4 generations of queens, and I'm proud to be Portuguese, and it's just like, it's more like a family thing, because most of the people that are in the parade with me are my relatives, all my cousins. My mother was queen, and my grandmother and my great-grandmother. So it makes me, it's like carrying on a family tradition.
But the story of Half Moon Bay goes back much earlier than the Portuguese and the Chamarita. 200 years ago, the Costanoan Indians were the only inhabitants here. They lived beside coastside creeks for thousands of years without any interruption of their lifestyle. Theirs was a simple life, following the basic laws of nature. Then, one day, unexpectedly, visitors arrived and changed the whole course of their future.
The first Spanish explorers that arrived here came in 1769, and of course they were lost. They were looking for Monterey Bay, and the old maps that they had of Monterey Bay didn't correspond to what they saw. So they kept heading north from Monterey Bay, and they headed up past Año Nuevo, and they headed up toward Half Moon Bay, and they just kind of kept going, still looking for Monterey Bay. Needless to say, they didn't find Monterey Bay, and they found San Francisco Bay. But what they did find was a people who had never even, not only had they never seen whites before, they had never even conceived that anybody could look like this. And you've got to recognize what it's like, you know, to live in a well-known world. And this was such a well-known world. Every rock had a name, every tree had a name, every creek had a name, every path had names, every person had names, and families had names. Everything was intimately well-known. And suddenly you look up and there's this whole new thing has just come up. And it's somebody sitting on a horse with metal on them. And the first thing that they thought when they saw this was that it was a new kind of animal, you see, that this man and the horse were all a kind of animal. That was all one thing. They just didn't even understand that people could be riding on horses. They didn't understand what this metal was all about. They didn't understand that people could look this way. And it was a complete and utter shock. There are anecdotes of people who just fell down in their tracks and couldn't move for sheer terror. After a while, they began to realize that these were probably human beings and some other kind of human beings, some other kind of thing. And there began there was a lot of curiosity, there was a lot of helpfulness. And in fact, the Portola expedition, when they came through Half Moon Bay, they were suffering terribly from scurvy. mainly because they had lots of meat that they could hunt, but they didn't have any vitamin C. They didn't have any fresh vegetables. They didn't know what kinds of plants grew around here. And it's questionable whether they ever would have made it if the Indians around here hadn't come and brought them different kinds of what the Spaniards described as tamales, which were kind of seed cakes. They were seeds that were covered with leaves.
But in spite of the Indians' kindness toward the Spanish explorers, the Padres soon revealed their true intentions. All the Indians were uprooted from the coastside and taken to a mission outpost north of Half Moon Bay.
And here, of course, they were, the tragedy happened that happened throughout much of the New World. They were brought into missions, they lost their culture, they were afflicted with disease. The priests who had kind of come with the idea of creating utopias, these little Christian utopias, found themselves instead in some kind of just a dreadful, horrible, and tragic situation where people were dying and people were not becoming good Catholics, that somehow these cultures persist, you know, for generations, and they didn't realize it. They thought they were just going to create it overnight. All they had to do was utter truth, and the light would shine, and that would be it. And it didn't happen.
So that was the first failure at Half Moon Bay. The Costanoan Indians, once in complete control, now gone. Without the Indians to fulfill their plans, the Spanish just marked time. They failed by losing a war with Mexico, and the coastside was cut up into huge land grants, ranchos, where cattle and horses roamed. The Mexican owners didn't live on their ranchos until 1846, the year the United States declared war on Mexico. Then these frightened Mexicans fled to the safety of their ranchos. It was hard to find a way over the mountains, but worth it. The secluded coastside provided the ideal hideaway. The Americans didn't discover them for several years, and when they did, they were surprised to find a Spanish-speaking community still thriving. But slowly, the Mexicans too were driven off the land, and yet another group failed to take hold in Half Moon Bay. One of the first Americans to arrive was James Johnston, who settled on one of the old land grants after first coming west to San Francisco.
He, however, was looking for a place to both build a house and to have a ranch. He acquired 1,400 acres of this beautiful coastside property at the same time when some of the other well-known names on the San Francisco Peninsula were building mansions on the other side of the hill. James climbed those hills, came over. Of course, by that time it was stagecoach and ox-drawn wagons, and picked this site for his home. He wanted to build a real American farmhouse to show his neighbors exactly what a proper farmhouse should look like. This was the only Yankee house on the coastside, in this part of the coastside at that time, and all of the other buildings were adobes.
Unlike the other Americans, Johnston showed no malice toward his Mexican neighbors, maybe because his fate seemed to be intertwined with theirs.
When the Johnstons first came to the house, it was the center of the cultural and social activity of the coastside. Of course, it was a magnificent house compared to even the lovely adobes and other kinds of houses that were here. But they were very active. They brought people down from San Francisco and certainly entertained their Spanish neighbors. The house became almost a symbol of the culture of what was happening on the coastside. We hope that that will happen again. But for a long period, it has been abandoned and empty and fell into quite serious disrepair. What happened was that Petra had 3 children, and the youngest, Alice, died when she was just a small girl. Very shortly after that, Petra died. We have tried to check to see what the cause of death was. There were some epidemics on the coastside. Her mother came up to raise the boys, and James found himself more and more in San Francisco. The house was empty for many, many years, and people referred to it often as kind of the haunted house on the hill.
Even if James Johnston's dream for a dairy farm had succeeded, he would have faced the same dilemma as the loggers in the nearby canyons and the farmers: no way to get his product to market. It was so impossible to ship produce or lumber out of the area that the most outrageous ideas were attempted. One of the most incredible was Gordon's chute. The scheme worked only long enough for it to be blown away in a storm. At the turn of the century, things began looking up, or so they thought.
Like, well, 1905, you know, why railroads were springing up all over the place, up and down the state from one end to the other. They were starting to build the system in Los Angeles there, and they had just finished a line over in Marin there, the NWP, the rapid transit. The key system was getting going with theirs, you know, and so these people figured, well, after all, why not a line down the coast to Santa Cruz? One of the prime reasons was that they figured if they built a line through to Santa Cruz on the coast, they could take a lot of the business away from the SP, you know, which had the monopoly up to then by going down the other way, you know, through San Jose and over the mountains and Los Gatos and into Santa Cruz. And it looked like a good proposition. No one else was in there, so anyway, they attracted these various people with the money, and the work commenced.
But the Ocean Shore Railroad hadn't even laid track beyond the mountainous barriers north of Half Moon Bay when natural disasters struck, the 1906 earthquake, and thousands of dollars of expensive equipment tumbled over the cliffs into the Pacific Ocean. Despite the bad omen, the railroad started all over again, and the first train rolled into Half Moon Bay about 1908.
They even invited people to go down on the weekends, give them a free ride down there and a free lunch. And then when you got off the train down there, all these salesmen were there busy, you know, the sales slips, you know, to sign on the dotted line to buy lots. Of course, they did pretty good business. They sold a lot of lots, you know, and they assured the people that the railroad would be finished within a year or two and in a wonderful rapid transit right into the heart of San Francisco, you know. Well, it sounded pretty good. It was a pretty good pitch, you know. If it had worked, I guess it would have been fine.
For the first time, the isolated beaches were being shown to the world. The plan was to create a Coney Island west on the coast side. Train stations were built, and a string of new beach towns sprouted up beside them.
And in fact, the business was so good for a while, they didn't have enough coaches. They found themselves in a bit of a problem there. However, one of the management people there, he got around that. He dragged out a bunch of flat cars, and they put benches on them, you know. A lot of people rode the flat cars with benches down here. Well, that's all very fine in a way, but if any of you have ever driven in an open car down along here when it's pretty windy, well, you can imagine how some of the ladies must have felt having their hats blowing off, and I don't know what else, especially when they're going around Pedro Point and Devil's Slide down there. It gets pretty windy, especially looking out over the edge of the flat car and seeing the ocean right down below where you're right at the edge of the cliff. Must have been quite an experience.
Restaurants were built along the line. Half Moon Bay showed great promise as a famous vacation resort for the well-heeled. But the natural barriers continued to present a problem.
On one occasion, I think around 1915, as a result of some fairly torrential storms, about a mile and a half or 2 miles of right-of-way, track and all, just suddenly dropped right out from under and went right into the ocean. Luckily, there were no trains in the area at the time, but that kind of disrupted service for a while. In fact, they had to, the way they managed for a bit there, they ran the trains down as far as they could go to where the right-of-way caved off, you know, and there was enough of space apparently left, and then they brought a train up from the south end, which luckily happened to be on the south end at the time. And the passengers got off of the train down there at the end of the track, and they walked along the edge of the cliff, sort of, you know, until they could get around to where the other train was. Then they got on that, and then the other train ran backwards down the rest of the way to Half Moon Bay and Tenitas.
As the landslides increased, fewer and fewer people traveled to Half Moon Bay. And despite the large number of lots that had been sold during the real estate boom, nobody built homes there. The Ocean Shore Railroad admitted defeat, and the rails were pulled up about 1920. With the loss of the trains came other casualties, like the Reef's Restaurant, once a popular stop along the Ocean Shore line. It was destroyed by a tidal wave. Most of the train stations were torn down. Those that still stand are barely recognizable, like this one, now used as a real estate office. So much for the railroad, another failure at Half Moon Bay. Up until now, the natural barriers had blocked plans for developing the coast side, but ironically, when Prohibition rolled in, Half Moon Bay's isolation was the key to success. Bootleggers and rum runners made fortunes smuggling illegal booze, unnoticed, protected by the very isolation which had doomed so many other schemes to failure. Nobody could get there easily unless they braved Pedro Mountain Road, and few government agents patrolled this rugged stretch of coast. Roadhouses appeared, and so did bordellos like this one, the Princeton Inn, closed down in the 1920s with the goings-on upstairs. In the 1920s, Half Moon Bay was notorious as the largest supplier of booze on the entire West Coast. Silent film stars and politicians from San Francisco often drove to the coast side and enjoyed this bar and the buildings, now gone, that once housed a bordello overlooking the Pacific Ocean where the booze was landed at night. But there were other stories that came out of this colorful era.
Our so-called Blue Lady, our ghost who haunts the place and is quite active here late at night. The story goes that there was a triangle going on between the piano player and a jealous husband and this so-called lady in blue here in the evenings, and fight started somehow between them, and somewhat we think that the murder was a stabbing on the beach, and the lady returned to the restaurant and has since been here and is quite active late at night, moving chairs and walking around the place, and slamming doors whenever she feels like she needs attention. Many other stories that we hear, some usually late at night. A cocktail waitress having her young 5-year-old child in the building as we were closing, and a conversation going on between the cocktail girl and the bartender and a couple other people, and the child wandering into the dining room and come running out screaming, saying, "There's somebody in there, there's a lady in blue." And everybody walking back into the dining room and finding nobody. But the child obviously saw her.
So only ghost stories remain as a memory of that era, and even this seeming success ended abruptly. Prohibition was repealed in 1933, the bootleggers and rum runners vanished. The year was 1939, and most people still didn't know where Half Moon Bay was. Time had passed the coast side by. Businessmen looked to the peninsula for the best opportunities. Industry and construction were booming there. It was the place to move to and raise a family away from the city. Recreation was seen as the future of Half Moon Bay, just as the Ocean Shore Railroad had hoped. But the same old problems stood in the way. It was hard to get there, even if you knew where it was. Jan McClure's grandparents built a cabin on the coast side in the railroad town of Montera when the train was still running. She often ran into friends who looked perplexed when she told them where she lived.
And people from outside the area didn't know, I'd never heard of Montera. There'd be the business about, even the postman didn't know it. If you send a letter to Montera, it would go to Manteca or Monterey or even Montana. And that was before zip codes. So when you tell your friends, let's go down to the beach, we'd bring our own house guests because there were so few people here. We'd bring, my daughter would bring a girlfriend and I'd bring a girlfriend, and we'd come and spend spring vacation. They would say, well, where's that? And we'd say, well, it's on the peninsula. And they'd say, oh, Redwood City, San Mateo, oh yes. Or even you say, oh no, this is country. Oh, maybe Big Basin, maybe they'd heard of that, or Carmel, Monterey, but nobody, even to this day, seems to know much, until the Sierra Club discovered us, knows much about the the coast side of the peninsula. This is one reason why it was so unpopulated, is because it was economically a disaster to live here.
It was not until the 1950s that the coast side began to lose some of its anonymity. This marked the beginning of the shift from the cities to the suburbs, and for some, Half Moon Bay seemed like country. The Bach Dancing and Dynamite Society is a jazz house overlooking Half Moon Bay. The owner is Pete Douglas. He was one of the first urban refugees to discover the coast side in the late 1950s.
One of the reasons I first came out here is because I was a poor county employee looking for many of us cheap rental. My particular reason was to find something on the beach, which didn't exist much, except to say this little building here, which I ended up buying. So a lot of us were actually the first commuters, were people with low salary incomes looking for a place out here. And I'd always had in this mind kind of being, you know, the fantasy of the late 50s scene was, you know, have your own espresso coffee shop, right? So I driving along this little street, and I see this beer joint, but I was really looking for a place to rent. And I pulled up and I looked in the windows, and there was a hamburger grill and a little bar. And so we went down to the local realtor, and we made an offer, ended up paying $8,500 for this little 50 by 100 foot commercial lot with this little stucco building sitting on it with weeds around it. It was funky.
But the rundown buildings, and especially the foggy weather during the summers that drove most people away, seemed to appeal to certain types of individuals. Patricia Erickson, who teaches etheric nutrition, and Jean Fleet, a gardener, found a special kind of lifestyle on the coast side.
There's a certain type of person that seems to live here. And I can't actually tell you what this kind of person is, except that they are an autonomous kind of person. They can deal with being their own person. There's a certain kind of person which stays here, which lives here, which thrives on it, and which gets off on it, and then which also channels into it, you see.
Some coastsiders feel that there is a difference between those people who live on the coast side and those who live over the hill on the peninsula.
If I would say, oh, I'm from the coast side, to them that would be such a long ways away, and certainly not a place that they would live. They admire the fact that I'm able to live so far away from where it's happening. And for them, they certainly couldn't.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that. There has been development, but not nearly what it could be. I mean, let's face it, we're just a stone's throw from over the hill each way, and it's a beautiful area. So in 10 years' time, there have been some people come in, but they have to be a certain kind of people that are going to stay here, or they leave.
Any newcomers who are going to stay find they have to live with Highway 1, a fragile connection between Half Moon Bay and San Francisco, especially at Devil's Slide, where the earth continues to slip into the sea, as it has been doing since the Ocean Shore Railroad first tried to open up the coast side to the world, and where some have been known to take a step too far over the edge at Devil's Slide. The mountains are more than landmarks. They are the heart of the area, and anyone who moves to Half Moon Bay cannot help but become aware of Devil's Slide. And year after year, the road at Devil's Slide is closed for repairs as it continues to slip into the sea, cutting the coast side off in one direction. So far, all attempts to build a bypass have been thwarted at Devil's Slide by a mountain which apparently can't be contained.
I think basically a great many of the people that live here on the etheric level support the mountain's decision. and say, yeah, we really don't, you know, want a freeway. I mean, you know, so that I think that those are the two energies that are compatible. Those are the people that stay here, which keep bringing in that energy, which the mountain really has, you might say, the first and last word in, anyway, because no one's going to control that mountain.
Besides the isolation of living in an area with only 2 roads, one of them undependable part of the year, there are other inconveniences to contend with. The publisher of the Half Moon Bay Review is a newcomer who took over the old family-run newspaper 20 years ago. He remembers the inconveniences of those days.
When I came here, there was no dental office except one man who was over 87 years old, and he came over on Saturday afternoon from 2 to 4. An excellent man, Dr. Sisson, who had an office in San Mateo. And he liked to come to Half Moon Bay on Saturday afternoons, and he would attend to your teeth. The lawyers, there was, when I came here in 1960, there was one lawyer who came over here from Edward City, the late Richard Bell, and he came over on Thursdays. That was the lawyer's day.
In this isolated community of Half Moon Bay, there were no lawyers, no dentists. Who was to be found there? Pete Douglas says it was an unusual mix.
And what we found was essentially the old community and scattered, you know, the fishermen, all kinds of characters who just can't make it in the more typical society, the fringe members of society, the drunks, the crazies. Man, they were all out here.
This isolated rural area couldn't remain a secret for long. The first newcomers had succeeded at fulfilling their dreams of escaping city life, but then the big developers, such as Henry Dolger, soon followed them to Half Moon Bay. Environmentalist Nancy Morrall remembers.
Well, when we first arrived in the mid-50s, there really were no development plans as far as we knew. And things were very quiet here until, I would say, in the early 60s. And then we began to hear that Henry Dolger had huge plans to develop the area. And one story that we heard was that he brought the president of the Bank of America down to one of the hilltops and waved his hand over the area and said, Eureka, we've found it. This is my new city.
Just like the promoters of the Ocean Shore Railroad, part of Henry Dolger's scheme to develop the coast side included plans for a kind of Coney Island West at Pillar Point Harbor. Only this time, the theme was to be more tropical, a Polynesian fishing village. Dolger did build one subdivision, but many of the newcomers fought the rest of his plans, and the Polynesian fishing village never happened. Dolger got the message, accepted his failure, and sold thousands of acres to yet another group of developers who were a little more successful, but only because they limited their development to the city of Half Moon Bay.
Drive up and down the coastal area, you can very easily see that the only plans that they were ever effectively able to carry out were their plans in Half Moon Bay. And I think this pretty much delineates the difference between the philosophical attitudes about the environment that exist on the mid-coast side. That is El Granada through Montera and the city of Half Moon Bay.
There may be philosophical differences on the coast side, but from the beginning, most new residents wanted to preserve the uniqueness of the area. The editor of the Half Moon Bay Review, Ed Bauer, was one of those opposed to unlimited growth.
We wanted balanced growth. We didn't want to see ultra-high density population and rows of houses butting one another with no open space. What we were looking for was balanced growth, and there is enough area over here for a balance in the growth.
But as the newcomers arrived, more building took place on the coast side than ever before, more than in its entire history. But besides more homes, the complexion of the coast side changed too.
Well, I think many of the fringe, eccentric element of society has moved out of here now. We have pretty much become a commuting area. It's growing in that direction. And still, coastside seems to have a certain character. It brings out highly individualistic people, not very community-oriented, or people who care to work together much in what we would consider traditional community activities or standards.
These newcomers may have been commuters and professionals who worked over the hill or in San Francisco, but they still felt they had special reasons for choosing Half Moon Bay as a place to live.
One of the reasons I stay here is that I like the feeling of being free to be as involved as I want to be involved. If I want to get into community activities, fine. If I don't feel pressure to do so. Have you experienced that?
I have been happily left alone for 15 years at least. And I can go and, yes.
How do you mean left alone? By left alone?
Well, I think what Ben was talking about was the kind of peer pressure that says you're going to put Christmas tree lights with a flaming reindeer, right? On in front of your house, because like that's what we do on this block. Well, yeah. People where I live don't do that.
One of the reasons I moved over here was that so that I wouldn't have to mow my lawn every Saturday. And that was one of the reasons. I know what you mean about the reindeer.
Once people arrived here, they didn't just want to be left alone socially. Some of the Coastsiders felt the area could exist without any connection to the outside world.
I had an experience once where I felt this section of the coastside separating and becoming an island from Devil's Slide down to Año Nuevo. And so we were cut off from the north and from the south and from the east, and not sunken beneath the surface of the water, because that doesn't seem to me to be the karma of this area. There's the San Andreas Fault behind 4 miles and the San Gregorio Fault out to sea about a half mile, and this provides a little isolated unit, and with just the right shift, we could be our own autonomous little unit out here. And I feel that it would work.
In the past, many of the newcomers who have come to the coastside have been known to be politically apathetic, but they do expect local government to preserve their lifestyle. On the other hand, they are unorganized politically precisely because of their lifestyle.
I think that many of them still come out here for that reason. Many of the people in conventional housing are, this is someplace they get away, and they really, their social and professional lives are carried on over the hill. When they come over here, they just don't participate in anything.
But the Coastsiders really began to respond politically when city-type building threatened to destroy their reason for coming here in the first place, which was to escape all of that. But their new political activism was not very successful.
When I lived in Lost Beach, I went to a public hearing over a proposed building on a very substandard lot. And I wasn't surprised, but I really felt put off by the condescension, the indifference of county government, at least the people in that hearing, toward anyone from the coastside. I felt like I was really interfering with their coffee break. You know, I was disrupting their process. And I've felt this ever since I've lived on the coast, that this was really an orphan child of the county. And people may come over to solicit our constituency prior to an election, but once they're in, I really haven't felt a lot of sensitivity to from the county toward the coastside.
That's right, and in order to work within the context of the system, we have to really become politically aware.
Many Coastsiders responded more than ever to a political issue in 1972. Proposition 20, popularly known as the Save the Beaches Initiative, the crux of which centered on the concept of growth versus no growth in coastal regions. Proposition 20 began in response to the results of a building boom which was sweeping all of California, late 60s and early 70s. The undeveloped coast side, only a stone's throw from metropolitan centers like San Francisco and the peninsula, caught the eye of developers who envisioned Half Moon Bay as a future bedroom community. Overnight, commercial structures and housing developments were built on what was once prime agricultural land around Half Moon Bay. And some of these housing developments blocked ocean views. A projected population of over 100,000 on the coast side, from Montera to Half Moon Bay, alarmed people, giving birth to the powerful environmental movement. Proposition 20 promised to save beaches, preserve agriculture and the fishing industry, as well as limit growth. But Proposition 20 may have promised too much, for there were also plans to develop Half Moon Bay Airport and to develop Pillar Point Harbor into a large-scale pleasure marina. Former El Granada postmaster Clay Fountain, who has been involved in saving the beaches, believes that Proposition 20 was a good law.
I campaigned as a so-called civic leader. I campaigned hard for Proposition 20, and I was glad that it passed, and it passed very strongly here in this area, because people feel like the coast natural beauty or scenic majesty ought to be like the air. It shouldn't have to pay for it, and it shouldn't be all cluttered up. The cosmos gives us these things. I have a very peculiar sense of what ownership is. I think the cosmos owns everything, and that it's improper for people to buy it or steal it or seize it and say, now this is mine and I'm the only one that's going to use this. I think the cosmos owns everything. I think the earth belongs to all of us, and that we ought to be humble about that and use it not for vainglory, not to get fatter than anybody else or richer, and just use what abundance there is on earth in a fair and pleasant way.
The environmentalists may have wanted to stop or limit growth in order to save the beaches and open space on the coast side, but there were developers anxious to complete their plans. Some construction slipped in before Proposition 20 passed, such as this subdivision overlooking the Pacific Ocean at Moss Beach. Another that just made it in under the wire was this golf course built by Westinghouse Corporation south of the city of Half Moon Bay. But the majority of plans for development of the coast side were halted by the effects of Proposition 20. When Prop 20 was passed in 1972, the law created a coastal zone governed by a board of publicly appointed and elected government officials known as the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission was empowered by the state legislature to regulate permit authority within the newly created coastal zone. This meant that local government, like the city of Half Moon Bay, could still issue building permits, but developers on the coast side had to win final approval to proceed with any type of construction from the Coastal Commission. This was considered a radical and controversial concept, taking traditional zoning powers away from local government. The effects of Prop 20 were immediately felt in the city of Half Moon Bay, where most of the large-scale development had been planned. Proposition 20 brought building on the coast side to a standstill. In addition, the Coastal Commission required all coastal communities, such as Half Moon Bay, to design a local coastal plan to be completed and presented before the Coastal Commission no later than July of 1981, when the law created by Prop 20 will expire. But even though the coast side voted in favor of Proposition 20, did the city government of Half Moon Bay feel there should be a Coastal Commission?
Politically, I don't want to answer that. You will get a yes and a no on that, depending on whom you're talking to. Yes, it causes a problem, and yes, we are greatly affected by it. We are the only city in the north half of the state that is mandated completely within the coastal act. They took us all, as the local saying goes. They took it all the way to the top of the hill, which is hardly coastside. That's 5 miles in.
But the passage of Proposition 20 and the creation of the Coastal Commission indicated voters felt Half Moon Bay was a unique and special place, still had a lot of beaches and open space worth saving for future generations, worth saving from sprawling overdevelopment. Half Moon Bay reminds visitors of someone's old hometown, And there's something about that feeling of the way it used to be that everyone wants to hang on to these days. But Ed Bauer has another opinion as to why the Coastal Commission exercises so much power on coastside development.
There's parts of California on the coast, this may surprise you, which are exempt from the provisions of the Coastal Commission. Los Angeles, parts of Los Angeles City, parts of Santa Cruz County, and parts of San Francisco City County are absolutely exempt. By political pressure, they've been able to get special concessions. Half Moon Bay, because of its light political muscle, couldn't stand up to Coastal Commission the way some of the other cities could.
Part of the coastal zone under the jurisdiction of the Coastal Commission includes the only other road into Half Moon Bay, Highway 92. It's a windy two-lane road which over recent years has become heavily traveled by commuters, and it has become the center of controversy. Lois Loftus is a Half Moon Bay realtor and an unsuccessful candidate for the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors. She has attended many meetings to complain about the dangers of Highway 92.
I consider Highway 92 an absolute death trap. Those passing lanes, you can't get by anyone who's going over 40 miles an hour. My son almost died of a bleeding ulcer when he was 15 years old. It happened at 11 o'clock at night. We were living in Pescadero at the time. I rushed him over to Redwood City. We had to stop in Half Moon Bay for him to vomit blood. I got him to the hospital. He passed out. He almost died. 5 days in intensive care, 14 blood transfusions, and there was 2.5 weeks I wasn't sure if he'd live or die. If that highway had been the least bit crowded, and Elaine Costello from the county made a statement that it's only crowded 10 days a year. I beg your pardon. It is crowded every time at commute hour. The little Damari boy was struck by a truck over here in the Alpha Beta parking lot. I checked with the fire department. They made record time, 12 minutes, to get him to the hospital. He died. So Sunday, when they were waiting for the flowers to arrive for the funeral, there had been an accident on Highway 92. The flowers were 3 hours late arriving here.
Those flowers weren't from the Half Moon Bay nursery, but the nursery's owner, who lives and works beside Highway 92, says he doesn't think there is much of a problem on the road.
And I will have to admit, I live on this highway, there is a bit of a commuter rush that does look a little scary. They're all 10 minutes late to work, and they're all going 50 miles an hour, and they're all driving 5 feet behind the car in front of them. And why, I don't know, because if you drive from Half Moon Bay to 280, if you were to break every speed law possible, you would only save yourself 5 minutes at the most and making that trip from Highway 1 to 280. So just sit back and relax and drive. And there will be some peak hours in the morning when people are going to work, when they're coming back. And as to the weekends, whenever the developers want to give you a reason why this highway should be widened, they'll wait to the busiest weekend of the year. Because I see them, I live here, I see them come run out with their little cameras on the hottest Memorial Day weekend in 5 years, and they snap that picture. And then it's clipped, to the statistics of why this highway is so busy.
For those unfamiliar with the windy road, Highway 92 can be especially dangerous on foggy days. But Ron Michelson says the danger on 92 does not come from overcrowding.
Most of the major accidents happen here because people are driving too fast, and a good many of them are drunk. They happen at strange times. They don't happen because the road is crowded here. The accidents happen here, individual cars, a lot of them just drive up the bank, or they miss the curve and they go over into the ditch. The accidents here are not caused by overcrowded highways. I mean, that's a real fallacy in their thinking. The highway accidents here are individual problems. People are just in a rush.
And being in a rush is very frustrating for commuters who find themselves in long lines behind gravel trucks which leave from a Half Moon Bay quarry every few minutes. Thus far, all attempts to change Highway 92 have been thwarted. Besides saving beaches, one of the main objectives of the Coastal Commission was to preserve agriculture on the coast side. But around Half Moon Bay, farming seems to be yet another coastside failure.
First speaker.
The change of zoning around Half Moon Bay to save agriculture, as mandated by the Coastal Commission, meant farmers who owned land within the city limits couldn't sell, but then they couldn't farm their land either because they were within city limits. Ida Andriotti is a Half Moon Bay farmer who has been caught in this regulatory catch-22.
Well, what I would like to know is why all of a sudden it's ready to be built on and it's split in half. Where you can't build on one side, it's zoned prime agricultural property. And we cannot make a living on 5 acres of land. We were told we had to cease and desist immediately in spraying. We have no water. There hasn't been any crops, any successful crops on that land for quite a while. We cannot continue to farm and make a living for myself and my husband.
Farming had been the main occupation on the coast side, but that was before the newcomers arrived and before the new regulations. Italo and Rena Pacini have farmed the coast side most of their lives, and Rena remembers why farming was successful.
They didn't have to spray like they do now. Now they have to spray more. I remember when my father never used to spray the sprouts years ago when I was a little girl. You know, the artichokes. They'd give them that horse manure, you know, and cow manure. And they didn't have tractors then. They had horses. They had 4 horses to plow.
There was a time when the fields of Half Moon Bay were covered with artichokes, when artichokes, in fact, were Half Moon Bay's biggest export, and when Half Moon Bay was known as the artichoke capital of the world.
They were good, no? Artichokes. I had to come out of
Cacciotti big like this.
Beautiful.
3 or 4 times small. The big, the first coming big.
They were great big artichokes.
4 inch wide. Big artichoke.
But today there are few artichokes to be seen around Half Moon Bay, and Half Moon Bay has relinquished its title as the artichoke capital of the world. The irony is compounded because as the newcomers moved into the old farming community, they ended up destroying the very rural environment that attracted them there in the first place. So much for farming in Half Moon Bay. As traditional field agriculture was phased out, it was replaced by the #1 industry in Half Moon Bay today, the flower and greenhouse industry. But even the greenhouses that now dot the coast side may not survive much longer due to lack of water and the high price of land, which is slowly driving them out to other areas. One of Half Moon Bay's potential assets and possible path to success has been the fishing industry, which started at Princeton, where Pillar Point Harbor now stands. The Coastal Commission promised to save the fishing industry, but the fishermen are finding it hard to survive. Local fisherman John Kep's father arrived on the coast side before the new harbor was built.
I've been here, I've been fishing 20 years myself, and my father was a fisherman before me. He came over here around the 40s, early 40s, start fishing. They came over for the shark business. That was the big boom in those days. Because during the war, they wanted the shark livers for vitamin A, and it was one of the big booms for fishing up and down the coast. And fishermen made real good money, especially for those times. And they'd fish with nets and long lines, and they'd catch the fish right out in front of the harbor. And they wouldn't have to range out that far. And you still hear the stories about, the big days they had, and, guys still talk about, like, those days were the good ones.
It was the sardine business that next brought dreams of prosperity to coastside fishermen and the promise of a fishing industry at Princeton.
And this town, at one time, was bigger. They had, there was canneries, there was 2 big canneries, and there was 3 piers, and 2 of them have been torn down. And the canneries are going all the time, and everybody in town worked at the canneries. The women worked packing the sardines, and the men, they'd either be unloading the boats or fishing the sardines. And it was a big business. It was much like a small cannery row at one time. All those buildings have been since torn down, but there was the old Petroni house and the old Nurley's restaurant, and there was hotels and rooms upstairs and bar down below, and you get anything you want in Princeton.
The sardines are gone, but the harbor has been expanded to accommodate pleasure craft and weekend fishermen. It should be prosperous for the local fishermen too. Yet, according to Michael McHenry, a local fisherman, government regulation is standing in the way of the fishing industry.
It's dead because of the harbor policies, the limits they have on us, and some of the government regulations they've imposed this year. But the potential is here. You have the boats, you have the people with the knowledge, people with the energy. The ocean's right here, but it just seems like with politics and stuff this last year or two, they've really held us down.
But McHenry feels there are other reasons for the failure of the fishing industry, some of them created by the fishermen themselves.
I think a lot of it is our own fault as fishermen, because we don't have the time to go kiss up a congressman or go to Sacramento or do this. Fishermen are probably fishermen because they basically like to stay away from the public. They like to go out in the ocean and have a lot of time to themselves. When it comes right down to it, you have to be one of these guys that goes to Congress and buy your politician off and this and that to get what we need in this industry. And we're not doing that. It's tough to keep this many individuals, to get them all together in one group as a fighting element. I think this is our biggest problem.
So many of the local fishermen have left Pillar Point Harbor for other ports on the California coast. The fishing industry struggles to survive at Half Moon Bay. Even the Coastal Commission, which was supposed to solve the mystery of Half Moon Bay, stop the cycle of false starts and unfinished business, save the beaches, farming and fishing, has itself become the center of controversy. San Mateo County Supervisor Fred Lyon, who lives on the coast side, was elected at the peak of the environmental movement in 1976, and he was a member of the Coastal Commission for 1 year.
And the Coastal Commission is criticized greatly for its arrogant disregard of property rights. It's criticized for being inhumane, not taking individual hardship into consideration in making its decisions about permits. It's criticized sometimes for quibbling over small points when it ought to be looking at the larger land use picture.
These people aren't attempting anything like reasonable compromise about anything. I mean, if you happen to be, you know, in the path of their grand ideas, and remember, they have God on their side. God's speaking to them. They're here to save nature. Who are we? Merely spoilers, human beings coming in and building things. Terrible.
I think the law itself that created the Coastal Commission is a good law and is being administered perhaps as well as such a law could be administered. But the fact of the matter is, it is being administered by human beings, and there are mistakes that are made from time to time and decisions that are wrong. But the overall effect has been positive and really pace-setting, I think.
Yet even those who support the idea of the Coastal Commission wonder if it too will not be a failure.
In the interim, the Coastal Commission has tended to soften some of its attitudes somewhat, and I disagree with that. I think they shouldn't have softened under this underground and sometimes open attacks on them by people who are interested in getting richer, getting fatter, and having more power.
Proposition 20's main theme and the Coastal Commission's main obligation was to save the beaches. But the greatest failure of all in Half Moon Bay may be the loss of the beach itself. This used to be a broad, sandy beach, so broad and sandy that motorcycle races were held here during the summer months.
After the construction of the breakwater in 1959, the sand was deprived from this section of the beach, and the focusing of the waves south of the breakwater depleted this broad beach of its sand, allowing the waves to get in at the sea cliff and to begin eroding these very soft alluvial deposits that we see exposed over here in the sea cliff.
And even today there's concern that the depletion of sand in this region will eventually affect the beaches to the south, and that this depletion of sand as it progresses will affect the state beaches, Dunes Beach to the south and other areas.
Farther south, the erosion threatens private property over which the Coastal Commission has jurisdiction. Pete Douglas lives on the edge of that erosion.
What we would like to do is talk to them about how to put a good practical seawall in here until such future date, if it ever happens, that the Corps would come in and do a major job, which has been what has been recommended by the Coastal Commission, but that's just a screen. They want this whole beach to go. They're going to be happy to see us washing the sea.
So not only has there been failure after failure here in Half Moon Bay, even the beach is now being lost, and the recreational value of the coast side, Half Moon Bay's greatest asset, may soon disappear.
As for what's going to happen,
that, too, is the mystery of Half Moon Bay.